What if kindness was not always kindness? What if beneath soft words and gentle smiles there lived an invisible script, a quiet strategy that made you doubt your instincts while praising your manners? Most people never question it because manipulation doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it arrives dressed as charm, and by the time your gut clenches, it's already inside. Carl Jung warned us that not all harm wears a villain's face. In fact, some of the most disorienting psychological invasions come from those who seem loving, agreeable, even spiritual. But beneath that surface lies something far more ancient, a shadow tactic rooted in archetypal patterns designed to bypass logic and penetrate your unconscious. These moments don't feel like attacks. They feel like confusion, like guilt, like suddenly needing to explain yourself for no reason. That's not random. That's shadow at work. This is what makes manipulation so dangerous for emotionally intelligent people. The more attuned you are, the more you instinctively notice the energetic dissonance behind words. Yet when the world tells you they meant well, you start to silence your inner radar. You begin to override your truth in favor of social acceptance. And that is exactly what these psychological tactics are designed to do, not to hurt you directly, but to make you doubt yourself quietly. The danger lies in how familiar it feels. Many of us grew up in homes where kindness and control were intertwined, where approval came only when we played the role others needed. So when someone today uses a soft tone to shut you down or a kind question to redirect your instincts, you miss the warning signs, not because you're naive, but because it mimics love as you were taught to receive it. But Jung believed that awareness dissolves the spell. The moment you name the tactic, you unplug from its power. This journey begins with a single shift, noticing when your body reacts, even while your mind still hesitates. That tension is not your weakness, it is your compass. When you learn to trust that signal, you no longer fall for the performance of kindness. You see through it, you reclaim clarity, and slowly, word by word, you exit the matrix of manipulation and return to your center. This isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone. It's about becoming loyal to your inner truth. Because in a world full of personas, clarity is a kind of rebellion, and depth in a shallow world is its own kind of light. Have you ever noticed how often people say, "You're too sensitive," right after you've spoken the truth? Not to hurt anyone, not to accuse, but simply to name something you felt in the room. It might be after you pointed out a change in someone's tone or expressed that something felt off. Suddenly, you're the problem, not the moment, not the tension, not the hidden insult in their words. You. That phrase, "too sensitive," doesn't just silence your voice. It trains you to betray your own nervous system. Think of how many women, especially in midlife, have endured decades of this subtle erasure. The daughter who sensed her father's withdrawal long before the divorce papers arrived. The employee who knew a boss's jokes carried a thread of cruelty, but laughed to keep the peace. The partner who felt the energy shift after a long silence, only to be told she was imagining it. These are not minor moments. They are psychological micro-wounds. Each time someone calls you too sensitive, they aren't offering insight. They're issuing a command. Stop perceiving. Carl Jung would call this an attack not on your behavior, but on your perception, your ability to interpret emotional data that others would rather leave buried. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is psychic intelligence. It is the language of the unconscious filtering through your body before your mind can explain it. The body knows, the soul senses, but the ego, the social mask, demands that you don't say anything that might disrupt the illusion. And so, too sensitive becomes a weapon of silence, wielded to protect the manipulator's comfort. What if we understood sensitivity not as a flaw to manage, but as a mirror reflecting the emotional truth of any moment? What if we taught our children that noticing what others miss is not an overreaction, but a gift? Jung believed that those who feel deeply are often the ones most connected to the collective unconscious. They absorb what others repress. They see what others avoid. And in a world built on denial, this is dangerous. But this sensitivity also holds the key to transformation. The moment you stop apologizing for it, the power dynamic begins to shift. The next time someone says, "You're so sensitive," try responding not with shame, but with stillness. Let the accusation hang, and then say, "Or maybe I'm just not ignoring what's actually happening." Watch what happens then. People who thrive on distortion cannot tolerate clarity. It unravels their script. So ask yourself, how many times have you felt something was wrong, only to dismiss it because someone told you that you were overreacting? How much of your emotional intuition has been locked away just to maintain relationships that were never rooted in honesty? And more importantly, what would it mean to begin listening to those subtle tremors again? This is not about being confrontational, it's about being internally loyal. When you begin to trust your sensitivity as perception, not pathology, your world starts to reorganize. Manipulators lose access. Conversations become cleaner. Energy drains stop. And you begin to feel at home in your own skin, not because others approve, but because your body finally believes you're listening. Let the audience reflect. Have you mistaken your empathy for a liability? Have you ever been gaslit into silence under the disguise of kindness? Drop a comment below and share the moment you first realized your sensitivity was your compass, not your curse. Because when you reclaim that inner radar, something remarkable happens. You stop shrinking to fit others' denial, and you start expanding into the truth that was always yours. Have you ever been asked, "Do you trust me?" right at the moment your intuition told you not to? It's a simple question on the surface, but one that carries a hidden blade. Behind it is not a request for trust. It's a demand for submission. The question isn't really about love or loyalty, it's about power. Because when someone asks you to prove your trust, what they're really saying is, "Choose me over yourself." And that's where the psychological trap begins. This moment is familiar to anyone who's ever been emotionally manipulated by someone they cared for, a parent, a partner, or even a friend. Maybe you hesitated, sensing something wasn't right, and they leaned in with a smile. "Don't you trust me?" The words were warm, but the tone carried pressure. You felt an invisible test forming in the air. Say no, and you're heartless. Say yes, and you've handed them the key to your boundaries. Most people say yes, not because they trust, but because they fear conflict. And slowly they begin to confuse trust with compliance. Carl Jung would call this a guilt activation tactic, a psychological maneuver that manipulates the moral archetype within you, the inner caregiver, the one that wants to be good, kind, and loving. Manipulators know how to pull this string perfectly. They wrap control in the language of intimacy, convincing you that questioning them means betraying love itself. But genuine trust doesn't ask you to turn off your intuition. It welcomes your doubt, because only what can survive scrutiny deserves your faith. Think back to your life. How many times have you ignored the voice inside you because you didn't want to appear cold or ungrateful? How many times did you sense something was wrong, but forced yourself to smile so you wouldn't be accused of being difficult? That hesitation, that moment when your intuition tightens but your words soften, is the precise space where manipulation takes root. And every time you override your inner knowing, you teach your unconscious that safety requires silence. Jung warned that when you betray the self to preserve a bond, you strengthen the shadow, the part of you that hides truth for the sake of belonging. You become fragmented, living between what you feel and what you say. Over time, this disconnect creates emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and even self-blame. You start believing you're the problem for doubting too much. But that isn't doubt. That's wisdom trying to speak. Imagine a woman who spent years in a relationship where "trust me" became the code for "don't question me." Every time she voiced a concern, she was met with guilt. Every instinct she ignored made her feel smaller, and every time she complied, her intuition grew quieter. One day, she wakes up realizing that she no longer recognizes her own reflection, not because she lost love, but because she lost herself trying to keep someone else comfortable. That realization hurts, but it's the moment she finally begins to wake up. So the next time someone asks, "Do you trust me?" Pause. Feel what your body does before your mouth answers. Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach sink? That's your unconscious warning you that the question isn't about trust, it's about control. Your empowered response is simple and disarming. Are you asking me to ignore my intuition? That single line dismantles the illusion because it refuses to play within their rules. It reminds both of you that your trust is sacred, not automatic. Healing begins the moment you understand that trust isn't a gift, it's a reflection of safety. You don't owe anyone blind faith. True trust doesn't demand silence. It allows questions. It welcomes awareness. And when you reclaim that right, you stop being the loyal one who loses themselves and become the conscious one who knows their worth. Real trust is not about believing someone else blindly. It's about believing in yourself fully. Have you ever found yourself defending something you never said? One moment you're gently raising a concern, and the next you're on trial. "Are you accusing me?" they ask, not because they seek clarity, but to shift the spotlight away from their behavior and onto your tone, your intent, your audacity to notice. In that instant, the air thickens. You begin to question not just the conversation, but your perception. And that is exactly the point. In emotionally manipulative dynamics, the moment of blame reversal is not accidental, it's strategic. Carl Jung called this psychic projection, the unconscious act of placing one's own denied behaviors onto another. But in the hands of a manipulator, projection becomes weaponized. It isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a tactic. When someone flips the blame back onto you for daring to speak your truth, they are protecting not just their ego, but their control. And the cruelest part? You start believing them. Let's say you notice a pattern. Your partner has been emotionally distant, but instead of addressing it directly, you ask a quiet question. "Is something bothering you?" Suddenly they raise their voice. "Why would you say that? Are you accusing me of something?" Now you're on your heels. You weren't accusing, you were observing. But now you feel guilty. You retreat, apologize, and promise to be more careful next time. And just like that, your voice gets smaller. This tactic is devastating because it plays on our deepest desire to stay connected. No one wants to be the difficult one. No one wants to be blamed for ruining the mood, especially in relationships where love has been historically conditional. You learn to hold back, not because you're wrong, but because you're tired of being made to feel wrong for simply seeing what's true. Jung taught that in such moments, the unconscious shadow of the other person is spilling out, but instead of owning it, they hand it to you to carry. And because you want peace, you accept it. But peace built on the silencing of your awareness is not peace at all. It is self-erasure in disguise. Here's where the shift begins. Instead of reacting, you pause. You let the accusation hang in the air without chasing it. And when you speak, you do not justify or explain. You ask calmly and without defense, "Should I be?" That question breaks the trance. It turns the mirror back to its rightful place without throwing it. It's not aggressive, it's conscious. It returns the burden of self-reflection to where it belongs. Think of a man who spent years with a parent who used guilt as glue. Every time he voiced a need, the parent would cry or accuse him of being ungrateful. Over time, he stopped expressing discomfort, fearing he was too harsh. In his adult relationships, he repeated the pattern, swallowing his truth to avoid being cast as the villain. It wasn't until a friend paused during a tense moment and said, "Should I be?" that he felt the spell break. In that pause, he recognized himself. And more importantly, he recognized the manipulation he had internalized as love. These moments are not easy. They crack illusions that kept us safe in the past. But they also open doors to authentic connection, where truth is not punished and perception is not treated as betrayal. So the next time you are met with, "Are you accusing me?" feel into the space that follows. Let your silence become the boundary. Let your question carry the weight. Because when you stop absorbing projections and start returning them with calm clarity, you don't just protect yourself, you wake yourself. And healing begins when you no longer argue with someone else's illusion, but instead stand rooted in your own inner knowing. That is where your real power lives. Would I ever lie to you? Have you ever felt the chill of doubt, not from a harsh accusation, but from a question that sounds warm, even loving? This is the cruelty of manipulation wrapped in the softness of faux innocence. It disarms you not by force, but by feigning virtue. And when it comes from someone you care about, a parent, a partner, a friend, it does something far more sinister. It turns your intuition into the enemy. At the surface, a question like, "Would I ever lie to you?" feels rhetorical, maybe even affectionate. But beneath that sweetness lies something else, psychological pressure. It places you in a double bind. If you say no, you ignore your gut. If you say yes, you betray the relationship. Either way, you lose. And that is the design. Because this question was never meant to be answered, it was meant to shut you up. Carl Jung would call this the performance of innocence, a calculated mask worn by those who fear being truly seen. But make no mistake, this isn't vulnerability, it's a theater. A manipulator does not aim to earn your trust. They aim to hijack your empathy. They will cry, they will tremble, they will turn the lights low and speak in wounded tones. They may even say, "I can't believe you think I'm capable of that." And suddenly, you are the one offering comfort. You are the one apologizing. You are the one doubting your senses. Let's take a painful but common example. A woman suspects her partner is hiding something. His behavior has shifted. His phone is always face down. His mood swings are sharper, and his explanations don't quite align. When she asks him gently, "Is there something you're not telling me?" he smiles, wounded. "Would I ever lie to you?" he whispers. She hesitates. She's not sure anymore, and because she wants to believe in the love they built, she stays quiet. But in doing so, she silences herself. The danger of this tactic is how effectively it uses your compassion against you. It capitalizes on your desire to see the best in people, to give the benefit of the doubt, to maintain peace. But Jung warns us that this peace is not peace at all. It is an illusion constructed atop suppressed perception. The psyche knows. Your body knows. But you've been trained to doubt what you know in the name of being fair. Healing begins when you interrupt this performance, not with accusation, but with clarity. When someone asks, "Would I ever lie to you?" the empowered response isn't to prove loyalty. It is to shift the spotlight. That's not the right question. The real one is, "Would I know if you did?" That response breaks the script. It reclaims your inner authority. It reminds the room that trust is not something you perform, it is something you verify. And this shift is not just interpersonal, it is ancestral. So many of us, especially those over 35, carry the residue of generational manipulation. We were taught to revere elders, to never question authority, to preserve harmony at all costs. But harmony that demands blindness is not sacred. It is self-abandonment. And the cost of that blindness accumulates over time into anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. Imagine the adult child of a parent who always meant well, but routinely gaslit their reality. The parent would smile and say, "You must be imagining things," when the child brought up mistreatment. Decades later, that child, now grown, still hears those words in moments of doubt. "You're overthinking. You're being dramatic. Would I ever lie to you?" These echoes shape relationships, careers, and even health, because when you are trained to doubt your own truth, you build a life around the lies of others. But the gift of midlife is this. You begin to ask different questions. You begin to listen not to the words, but to the energy beneath them. You begin to hear not what they say, but what your body feels. And when that moment arrives, when someone looks at you and asks that question again, you'll no longer shrink. You'll pause. You'll smile, not out of fear, but out of knowing. And you'll answer with your calm, sacred clarity. "Would I know if you did?" Because healing is not about trusting others more blindly, it is about learning to trust yourself without apology. And the moment you do, the act ends, the performance fades, and what remains is the one voice that was always telling the truth, your own. What if the most healing thing you could do is simply believe in yourself the first time? It sounds so simple, yet for so many adults, especially those who have spent decades in self-doubt, people-pleasing, or caretaking roles, this act feels radical. After years of being trained to second-guess your intuition, to smooth over discomfort, to respond to guilt with appeasement, it can feel unfamiliar, even rebellious, to just pause and believe what you feel. But what if that pause is exactly where the healing begins? Let's step into a more life-affirming space. Imagine a moment where someone does question the narrative, not to accuse, but to honor their truth. A woman in her early 50s, let's call her Elena, finally leaves a long-term relationship. Not because she was screamed at, not because she found definitive proof of betrayal, but because something inside her, something quiet and persistent, said, "This is not love." For years, she dismissed it, telling herself she was too sensitive, too needy, too suspicious. But one day, when the same old question echoed again, "Would I ever lie to you?" she didn't respond. She didn't argue. She just knew, and that knowing was enough. Carl Jung spoke deeply about the inner voice, the self that emerges when the ego stops scrambling to survive. He explained that in individuation there comes a moment when the false layers begin to fall away. When performance ends, clarity enters. And clarity often sounds like this: I don't need to explain why. I just know this is not right for me. That is not selfishness. That is sovereignty. In a world built on manipulation scripts, your clarity becomes your shield. But this isn't about turning cold or hyper-skeptical. This is about relearning the sacred art of discernment. Not everything that sounds sweet is safe. Not every tear is true. Not every kind voice holds kind intent, and not every confrontation is unloving. Sometimes asking the uncomfortable question is the deepest form of self-respect. What would it mean if your healing didn't require more evidence, but more self-trust? What if your job was not to decode their motives, but to stay with your own signals? The people who love you will not punish your clarity. They will not shrink when you speak your truth. In fact, the ones aligned with your soul will rise when you do, because you are no longer performing innocence for anyone, not even for yourself. And something magical happens when you stop responding to guilt-baiting with over-explaining. You begin to meet people who do not fear your boundaries. You stop attracting those who need to dominate the narrative. You become less available for emotional theater and more open to emotional honesty. As Jung would say, your psychic energy begins to return to you, no longer scattered in the performance of being good, but integrated into the presence of being whole. So the next time someone looks at you with those soft eyes and whispers, "Would I ever lie to you?" Pause, smile gently, and instead of spiraling into guilt or apology, ask yourself this: do I feel safe here? If the answer is no, you don't need to explain why. You don't need to wait for proof. You don't need to be perfect in your delivery. You simply need to trust that your nervous system, your body, your soul already know what your mind is still trying to rationalize. Because healing is not found in proving others wrong, it is found in no longer abandoning yourself to be right. And once you master that pause, once you stop playing the role of the apologetic truth-teller, you'll discover a quiet power, the ability to walk away, not because you know everything, but because you finally know enough. And that is where the game ends. That is where your real life begins. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you realize you are no longer easily shaken. Not because life stopped testing you, but because you stopped handing over your center to every person who tries to provoke it. Have you ever noticed how the same people who once triggered your spirals no longer get a reaction from you? That is not indifference. That is evolution. Carl Jung teaches us that people do not attack our essence. They target your complexes, the unresolved pockets of your psyche that still hold pain, shame, or unmet needs. Manipulators sense these blind spots. Like emotional locksmiths, they poke and prod until you unlock yourself for them. But here's the truth. When you begin the process of integration, when you meet your shadow and bring it into the light, you rob them of their favorite weapon. This is not about becoming cold or guarded. It is about becoming whole. You no longer confuse drama with passion. You no longer mistake guilt for love. You no longer let others dictate the rhythm of your nervous system. Why? Because you have reclaimed your rhythm. You have made a home in your own inner world, and that world no longer runs on someone else's emotional electricity. This is what Jung called psychological sovereignty. You are no longer triggered, you are aware. You do not react, you respond. You feel the pull of the old complex, but instead of collapsing into it, you breathe through it. You witness your own pattern with compassion, not condemnation, and in that witnessing, you become unshakable. Not because you are perfect, but because you are conscious. And once you become conscious, you become a mirror. People can no longer project onto you without facing themselves. They can no longer gaslight you without feeling their own dissonance. You become a kind of emotional truth serum, and that terrifies those who thrive in illusion. They will say, "You've changed." They will say, "You're cold." But what they really mean is, you're no longer easy to control. This is the mindset that sets you free. It is not about fighting harder. It is about refusing to play the game. When your presence no longer dances to the beat of manipulation, you become untouchable. You are no longer a puppet. You are no longer bait. You are no longer the fixer, the explainer, the justifier. You are simply yourself, and that is the most powerful place you can live from. So the next time someone tries to stir your storm, watch what rises in you. If it is peace, you've already won. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.